My brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I want to begin by mentioning a verse of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, after A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have revealed upon you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a dhikr, that you may make clear to people. A dhikr means the message, the reminder, that you may make clear to people, that you may clarify for people what has been revealed to them, and in order that they may reflect. And the Shaykh Muhammad Ghazali rahimahullah, one of the 20th century scholars of Al-Azhar, when citing this verse, pointed out how the deen of Islam has come after the previous messages and restored the balance between text and reason, between the clarifying what has been revealed to them. What has been revealed is the Quran, and the dhikr, or the message and the reminder in this context, is the Sunnah. And وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, in order that they may ponder and reason and reflect. This series of lectures, as you know, is addressing a broader theme, which is, we have termed it a compass for the seeker of knowledge. And as I'd mentioned at the first talk, which was 2 months ago, originally this was a course which went over a weekend, so over 2 full days. And in this course, we are trying to look at different aspects of knowledge. And these are the ones that we have covered in the course. As you can see, the idea that we're trying to promote is how we approach Islamic knowledge, or how we approach knowledge in general. So in the first place, we have tried to take away the dichotomy between Islamic knowledge and secular knowledge. Because as a Muslim, we need to know how to deal and interact with not only knowledge of the Quran and of the Sunnah and fiqh and aqidah and spirituality, but also we need to know how to deal with the other sciences and things which help us in this life and can help us even in our pursuit of success in the hereafter. And those are the things that we've mentioned on the right. But the other angle that we were approaching, as this is based on a book by Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the idea of this course was from a small book that he has written called ثقافة الداعية, which means the essential culture or the essential knowledge for any person involved in da'wah. Because when you are involved in da'wah, when you are inviting people to Allah, when you're involved in Islamic work, whether you like it or not, you will have to refer to Islamic knowledge in everything that you do. And you will be for people a reference point in Islamic knowledge, whether you like it or not. Because people will look to you as someone who knows what he or she is talking about. So the idea of this small book was to say, so what is the essential things that you must know about Quranic sciences and hadith and fiqh and so on? We're not expecting everybody to be a scholar, but if you are involved in this work, what are the things that you will need to know? And since we're approaching from that angle, and I've tried to widen it to say, as a Muslim, in our everyday lives also, what do we need to know? I hope that you will understand that I'm not, as it were, an inspirational speaker. Somebody said to me after the last talk, you should try to sound more like Malcolm X. And I said, Jazakallah khair, I don't think that's going to happen. But what I'm trying to do is give you some practical tips and advice, not a whole theoretical background and not a whole... we're not going to try to cover everything that is involved in hadith sciences in one small talk. But what we're trying to do is get to some essential matters. And I would claim that these are the kind of things that you might not hear elsewhere, even if they are quite simple points, but these are things that sometimes are not addressed in this way, in the practical way. وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقِ. Last time we had talked about the Quran, and this is just the subtitles that we mentioned. How we approach the Quran in terms of its characteristics, our duties towards the Quran in terms of recitation, memorization, how we reflect upon the Quran and how we understand it. So we got into some nitty-gritty there about what are some of the works of tafsir, how do we read tafsir, what kind of translations are available, how do we navigate the issue of translations of the Quran. So if you missed that one, then inshallah, maybe we'll do it again in the future. But today we are talking about the Sunnah. And of course, mentioning the Quran and mentioning the Sunnah, there's a very clear logical order here. The first source of Islamic knowledge, the first source of Islamic legislation, the primary reference point for every Muslim is the Quran. And with it is the Sunnah. Or after it is the Sunnah. And there's no contradiction between these statements. Sometimes it's more befitting to say with it, and sometimes it's more befitting to say after it. Because of course Quran is number one, Sunnah is number two. But since we are not able to separate these things entirely, then we have to emphasize this. Especially because, as I'm inshallah going to talk about, there is from time to time, and maybe it seems to be increasing at times, a controversy around the Sunnah, its authority, its place in Islam. From people who want to claim that we want to go back to the Quran only and reinstate the Quran as the only source. So this is something that inshallah we will touch on. Before talking about roles of the Sunnah, let me just clarify what we mean by the Sunnah. Again, in this course, we're not trying to go into all the technical definitions and so on. But basically speaking, we understand that by the Sunnah, we mean the statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we mean also his actions, and we mean his tacit approval when something was done in front of him and he accepted that to be done without correcting it or rebuking it. And there are other aspects of the Sunnah, there are some definitions of the Sunnah that are broader than this. Because the Sunnah can include also the personal characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, his appearance, his dress, his mannerisms. The Sunnah also can include even more than that. Because some of the definitions of Sunnah, and this is the definition that is used by the Hadith scholars, it also includes the same things which are attributed to the companions or the tabi'een, apart from their personal characteristics, but their statements and their actions especially. These are considered as Sunnah as well, in a broader sense. Because the word Sunnah has different senses. This is the problem sometimes when you're having a discussion with someone and you mean different things by the word that you're using. Because the word itself has different meanings in different contexts. Sometimes the Sunnah means the broadest possible thing, which is Islam in general is the Sunnah. And this is where, for example, you say, every action that you do has to have a right intention and has to be in accordance with the Sunnah. And somebody says, hold on, in accordance with the Sunnah, or what about the Quran and Sunnah? Yes, by Sunnah we mean Quran and Sunnah, i.e. the path. That's what the word Sunnah means originally, it is the trodden path. So the path of the community of believers which follows the Quran and the Sunnah, this is called the Sunnah. And here we have the other uses of it when you're distinguishing between Ahl al-Sunnah and other sects and groups and ideologies that have emerged from within Islamic community and in our history. So if Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as opposed to the Shia, for example, who are the party of Ali as they define themselves. But we don't mean this, of course, in our discussion. We want to clarify here for a moment, what do we mean by Sunnah as opposed to Hadith? Because we could have termed this talk approaching the Hadith, and to some extent that is what we're going to be talking about. Quite a lot of it is about Hadith. I would simplify the difference between Hadith and Sunnah just to say this. By Hadith we mean any report which tells us about the Prophet's statement sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or his actions, or his taqreer, or his sifat, or his characteristics. It's a report, it is a statement. Hadith is reported from him, and it's telling us about the Sunnah, about his way and his character and his teachings sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what are the roles of the Sunnah? Why is there a Sunnah? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ الْقُرْآنَ وَمِثْلَهُ مَعَهُ. I have been given the Quran and it's like with it. Which gives us the first idea of the importance of the Sunnah. We mentioned the verse at the beginning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his last messenger, and says, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ, and we have given you the message or the reminder that you may clarify for people what has been revealed to them, and in order that they may reflect. So the first role of the Prophet ﷺ is to clarify the Quran. As we know, the Prophet ﷺ has no role in authoring the Quran or altering its words in any way. But his role was first to receive, to memorize, and to convey, and then to explain. And this is something which Allah Azza wa Jal has taken as his responsibility, but he has made the Prophet ﷺ able to do it. And he has given the Prophet ﷺ the knowledge in order to explain the Quran. So there was nobody and is nobody on the face of the planet more knowledgeable of the book of Allah than the one on whom it was revealed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he has the role of clarifying the Quran, explaining it. Now, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah in his book Usul al-Tafsir, or his treatise on the principles of interpretation of the Quran, makes a claim that the Prophet ﷺ had explained all or most of the Quran to his Sahaba. But in actual fact, when you study the issue and study what scholars have said since then, in analyzing this claim, you'll find that there are only a small number of hadiths in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have explicitly explained certain verses of the Quran. So it is not enough just to say, well, his explanation of the Quran is those hadiths that we have, where he has told us the meaning of this word is this, or we understand it in the light of that. But his explanation of the Quran is many, many things. His explanation of the Quran is his action as well. It is his implementation. And for example, when the Quran says, "Aqimu as-salah," establish the prayer, it is through the actions of the Prophet ﷺ that we see how to establish the prayer. What is the establishment of that prayer? Because he has told us, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli," pray as you have seen me praying. And in the Hajj he has said, "Khudhu anni manasikakum," take from me the rites of pilgrimage. So it is from him that we learn the meaning of the injunctions in the Quran. And sometimes there are things in the Quran which are said in a universal or general way, and the Prophet ﷺ has explained how it is specified. So to give an example, just the first that comes to mind, the punishment for someone who steals is specified in the Quran as what? Can anyone say? Cut which hand? Not specified in the Quran. In fact, the Quran says, فَقَطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. And first of all, the word yad here, the word yad in Arabic, it goes from here to here. Okay? Nobody has ever cut this much for a crime of theft. Secondly, could it be implied that both hands are to be removed? Or if it's one of the hands, it is not specified in the Quran which one. But it's the Sunnah that tells us it is the right hand. First of all, it's the right yad. And then from the yad, it is only from here to here, until the wrist. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that the word yad in Arabic is the whole of that. Okay, like the hand of a clock. Yeah, it's long. Yeah? So the Sunnah has clarified that you don't remove the whole arm. And it's not both arms. So we need the Sunnah to specify. Many, many examples could be given, but that would require more time than we have. So as well as clarifying the Quran, also we have examples where the Sunnah provides additional rulings, or something which gives further detail than what is in the Quran itself. So for example, there are categories of those whom it is not permitted to marry. There's specific verses in the Quran which list حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ. All these verses, you cannot marry, of course, your mother or her mother, and so on, all the line of mothers going up. You cannot marry your daughter or granddaughter, and so on and so on. And all these categories are laid out. But the Prophet ﷺ has told us also that you cannot marry a woman and her aunt at the same time. Okay, that's in the assumption of polygamy. So in the case where somebody is marrying one woman, he cannot marry also her aunt. Whereas the Quran only tells us, وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, that you cannot marry two sisters at the same time. But the Sunnah tells us, and also you cannot marry a woman and her aunt, or if you like, a woman and her niece. Categories of meat which are forbidden. The Sunnah tells us one which is not in the Quran, which is the meat of the domestic donkey. I don't think anybody, inshallah, maybe you will find it in Tesco. Anyway, it is haram. So additional rulings. Number 3, that the Sunnah provides a practical example. And this is really the essence of the Sunnah and the essence of why we believe in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, why we follow him. And unfortunately, it's an issue where people get into some pointless debates sometimes. The Quran gives us very clear statements about how the Prophet ﷺ is one of us, how he is a human being. And this is the fact of the seerah. He lived like us, he breathed like us, he bled. I would like to say like us. No, he bled for us. He went through pain and suffering. He went through hardship for us. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And he showed us what it is to be a human being. The Quran says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Say, I am only a human being like you, but it is revealed to me, it is inspired to me that your Lord, that your God is only one God. So while he is a human being, he is not like all other human beings because he is better. He is a higher grade of human being, but he is a human being. And to try to deny this, number 1 is the denial of the statements in the Quran. Number 2 is really defeating the purpose. Because the Quran has also shown us how the unbelievers would ask, why did they not send an angel? Why did they send you? We know you, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, you grew up here in Mecca. You're a human being, you're like us, you walk around. Just like Jesus, peace be upon him, it's given as a proof of his humanity that he ate and drank and walked in the markets. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ate and drank and walked among people. And they knew him. So they said, why did Allah not send an angel then? And the Quran gives numerous answers to this in various places in the Quran. One of them is that if we had sent an angel, then you would not have been able to appreciate or relate to the angel. So we would have had to make the angel in the form of a human being. So then we would be back to square one. I'm paraphrasing the argument that's given in the Quran. Another verse says, if it were angels who were walking around on earth, then we would have sent them an angel as a messenger. So in other words, since they are human beings walking on earth, they need a human being to be their messenger, to be their example, to be their sunnah, to be their qudwa, to be their uswa. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, there has ever been for you in the Messenger of Allah a noble example. How can he be an example unless we can relate to him? By always aspiring to be as good as him. Never reaching that level, but always aspiring. Whereas we cannot aspire to be like a creation which is other than our creation. A species which is other than our species. So the practical example comes to us in hadiths and in sunnah in general, but most eloquently comes to us in the form of the seerah. So there are books which are written on the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Alhamdulillah, by now there are many books of this nature. There are many books in English and other languages which present to us the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is something which requires our attention and our focus, especially, as I gave the context at the beginning, for those who are involved in da'wah. Because the life of the Prophet ﷺ was all about da'wah. It was about many, many other things, but here is a question that we have to ask. What do we mean and what do we understand by the word sunnah? What comes to mind when we talk about sunnah? Are we talking about the sunnah prayers, for example? Yes, alhamdulillah. The sunnah prayers alongside the fard prayers. Or, when we think of the word sunnah, some people will think about the way of dress, the use of the miswak and things like this. You know the issues that people sometimes focus on. And not just focusing on a personal level, which is absolutely no problem, but making that an issue with fellow Muslims. Why are you not following the sunnah, brother? This sunnah, that sunnah. And what they mean is very specific issues. And some of those things, by the way, because sunnah, according to the scholars, is of different categories. Among the ways that they categorize the Sunnah is they're the Sunnah of Huda, which is the Sunnah which we are expected to follow, and there is Sunnah which is to do with the Prophet ﷺ's own preferences. For example, the food that he liked to eat. And this applies to the way that he liked to dress, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, bearing in mind that he was born in a particular place and environment, and he dressed like the people dressed. So, in a way, the argument can be made, and this is another longer discussion, so I don't want to open up controversial things, but the argument can be made that the Sunnah is to dress as the people dress in your country and in your culture, as long as that is within the bounds of the Sharia, what has to be covered, what are the conditions of covering and awrah. And I understand and I sympathize that is easier to say for the men than it is for the women, how to be on the way of the culture and at the same time observing the cultural norms. So I realize that it is easier to say that for the men than for the women. But still the principle is there, and that's something that should be appreciated. So, studying the seerah, after all, the main purpose of the Sunnah, we ask, what is the main purpose of the Messenger ﷺ coming? The main purpose was to bring mankind out of darkness into light, to guide them to success in this life and the hereafter. This is da'wah. So if the main purpose of the Sunnah is da'wah, as the Quran says, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. Say, this is my way. I invite to Allah upon clear insight, I and whoever follows me. So the Sunnah, or following the Prophet ﷺ, is to give da'wah, first and foremost. Then that is proven by any reading of the seerah. You will read about how the story of the seerah is a story of da'wah, from beginning to end. So we want to benefit from this aspect in particular. Now coming to the controversies that I mentioned before, that people raise about the authority of the Sunnah. I feel, and I'd be interested to hear if you agree or not, that this is something which is an increasing problem amongst people who deem themselves to be intellectuals and have started reading certain websites and being influenced by certain thoughts and ideas, and unfortunately haven't met sufficient response from the mainstream Muslim scholars and haven't come across the resources that respond to these. It is those people who claim that there is no such thing as following the Sunnah, but all that we have to follow is the Quran. And they base that on statements which sound good on the surface, which is, the Quran is sufficient for us. And the verses of the Quran which say that the Quran clarifies all things. I myself am a big fan of the Quran, as I'm sure that you are. But it is not an approval and praise of the Quran to deny the Sunnah. To say that the Quran is sufficient is true, but that doesn't take away from the role of the Sunnah that we have mentioned before. The different roles of the Sunnah in clarifying and providing the explanation and practical implementation of the Quran. The proofs of this, we want to mention a few of them. I haven't put them all up on the screen in full, but we will mention some of the verses. One of them I have already mentioned, which is, we have revealed to you, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. First of all, bear in mind that I'm not going to use hadiths to prove the authority of hadith, because that's circular. Okay, so those people who don't accept hadiths, they're not going to accept the hadith as proof of hadiths, are they? So let us look then at the Quran itself. So here in that verse, it is mentioned that we have given you a dhikr to explain to people what has been revealed to them. So that dhikr is something different from what has been revealed to them. مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ, but it's something which is revealed from Allah. وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرِ. So the dhikr is something which has the role of bayan, of clarification, of explanation. And then the word dhikr comes as well in Surah Al-Hijr. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We have indeed revealed the remembrance of dhikr, وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Now, this is most clearly understood as referring to the Quran itself. We have revealed the Quran, And Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying that He will preserve it. But part of preserving it is to preserve its meaning and its understanding. So it would not have been preserved if it had been revealed to people 14 centuries ago without any explanation, without any implementation. It would have been lost in the annals of history. So it is necessary, in order that Allah Azza wa Jal would fulfill His promise of preserving the Quran, that He would send someone to explain it. And that is the role of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is another proof. That's why we refer to the Sunnah as the unrecited revelation. We refer to it as revelation because it is from Allah. It is from Allah in its meanings. And the Quran tells us about the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, that he does not speak from his own desire, but it is only revelation which comes to him. So this is whenever he speaks about something in the deen. Okay, because that doesn't take away. And some people do imagine this. In fact, some people imagine that the Prophet ﷺ only spoke hadith. And by the way, that's true, of course, because anything that was reported from the Prophet ﷺ would become hadith. But not everything he said was about every profound matter of the deen. But he would obviously speak to his wives, he would speak to his companions about different things. So that might seem like a strange claim, but what is even stranger is that those so-called Quranists believe that he never spoke anything except Quran. Some of them go as far as to claim this. Why? Because the uncomfortable truth would be for them, is it not the case that the companions who were with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ when he is conveying the Quran, would they not be interested to hear what he has to say about the Quran? And would they not want to preserve that? Would they not want to tell other people about it? Would they not realize that obviously the person who is receiving the Quran and who has been described in the Quran as uswatun hasana, would they not want to convey what he has said about the Quran? So it's an uncomfortable truth, an obvious thing. Of course there is a sunnah, and of course it must be preserved. But to avoid that, they want to say, oh, he only ever spoke Quran. So he's like a postman, he brings the book and he delivers it. And this is obviously an injustice to the Messenger ﷺ and an injustice to the Quran. Because when they doubt the authenticity of hadith, they're saying it's been conveyed by human beings. Whereas the Quran has come from Allah. Yes. And who conveyed the Quran to you? Human beings. Which human beings? The same ones that you're accusing have fabricated all the hadiths on the Messenger ﷺ. So it doesn't make any sense to reject the hadith while accepting the Quran and its authenticity. Yes, the Quran is of a special level of authenticity, special level of transmission. But there are some hadiths which are on that level, or close to that level. And other hadiths we're going to speak about have been preserved in different ways. In one verse, Allah tells us to obey Him and to obey the Messenger. He says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those charged with authority among you. In one interpretation this is the scholars, another interpretation this is the rulers, the just rulers, let us say, just to clarify, because in these times there's a lot of controversy over these matters. So obey Allah and obey the Messenger. And here the word ati'u has come twice. Obey Allah, obey the Messenger. And then it's not the third time, obey the rulers. It is, and the rulers. I.e., obey them, the rulers, only insofar as they obey Allah and His Messenger. And then to clarify that further, the rest of the verse comes. فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. But if you should dispute over anything, if you differ on anything, then return the matter to Allah and His Messenger. In the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, how would they do that? They would go to him. Ya Rasulullah, we have differed on this matter, so judge between us. What do we do after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ from this life? We go back to his sunnah. We go back to Allah through his book. And we go back to the Messenger through his sunnah. And some of the scholars, when they were asked, give me a proof of this, they told the matter and they gave a proof from the sunnah. So someone would say to them, I want a proof from the Quran. He says, I'll give you a proof from the Quran. Allah says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. And whatever the Messenger ﷺ has given you, then take it. وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Anything that He has forbidden you from, then abstain. So the Quran does command. There are other verses, there are plenty of proofs of this, such as all the mentions in the Quran of Al-Kitab wal-Hikmah, that the Messenger has come to recite to people and to teach them, وَيُعَلِّمْهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. And Imam al-Shafi'i has pointed out very wisely that this means the book is one thing and the hikmah is something else. And they can only refer then to the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after mentioning that the Quran commands, there's a third point, which is necessity. And I mentioned this before when we said, when we want to implement the command to pray, for example, we need to know how to pray. So it's a matter of necessity that we have a clarification from the Sunnah. But the last point here is important because it is the doubt that is put. People say, for example, well, if you open any book of hadith, you find many things which are weak. And there's a thing called fabricated hadiths. So if there are fabricated hadiths, that means that you can't trust hadiths. Right? But in fact, it's the exact opposite of what they're saying. The fact that you know that there are fabricated hadiths is a proof that not all hadiths are fabricated. The fact that the scholars have identified the fabricated hadiths shows that the scholars of Islam and the community of Islam and the ummah of Islam has taken it upon itself to fulfill this thing which we are calling the Hadith Project. And it was the greatest academic project in the history of mankind. And there are scholars, non-Muslim scholars, who would acknowledge this. No other community has the attention to isnad that the Muslim ummah has developed. Who told you that? And this started from the time of fitna. As soon as the Sahaba used to just exchange, oh, the Messenger said that? Okay, I take it from you that the Messenger said that. But then after that, when things started to get ugly and some conflicts arose, then they would say to somebody, not to a Sahabi, but they would say to somebody who was narrating from the Sahaba, who told you this? Where did you hear it from? Where did they hear it from? And then it developed that they would study the people, individual people in the chain of narration, until it reached those who compiled the books of hadith. When they were compiled, then they were written with the full isnad, the full chain. And the scholars would be able to see who has narrated from who, from who, from whom. And through that they will be able to see this narration is very strong, authentic, unassailable. This one is strong but to a lesser degree. This one is weak and doubtful. This one is clearly fabricated because look at this person has been involved in the chain. If that person is known as a liar, so this narration should be rejected. Those are the ones which are called fabricated. The very fact that we know about fabricated and weak hadiths and very weak hadiths and Hasan hadith and Sahih hadith is because of the Hadith Project. And it is a great shame that Muslims are not more appreciative and more amazed. And to be honest, I think that it would be enough reason if somebody studied this for them to embrace Islam. Because how Allah Azza wa Jalla has chosen this ummah to develop this from so many centuries ago. This advancement in knowledge which is represented by the Hadith Project. It is enough reason to say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. So let's get to some of the practical matters for us and what we need to know about the books of Hadith. There are early collections of Hadith which it goes to answer the claim that many people make. Muslims make it as well. The Hadith were not written down until the time of Bukhari, rahimahullah. And they think that the Sahih of Bukhari was the first book of Hadith. And this is a nonsense claim. Because there were Sahaba who wrote down Hadith, it was not very common. But Shaykh Muhammad Mustafa Al-Azami has got a book called Early Hadith Literature. And he has mentioned around 40 Sahaba who used to write down Hadith, or write down some Hadith for themselves. It was not a big project at that time to write down Hadith, because the attention was on writing the Quran. But it happened. And these hadiths were conveyed through writing and through oral transmission, both, until various compilations came. And the culmination and the mastery was achieved by the time of Bukhari, rahimahullah. But before him, the role of Bukhari and Muslim, and these are the names that we hear all the time when we're talking about hadith, is the hadith in Bukhari, the hadith in Muslim. Okay, Imam Bukhari and his student Imam Muslim had a special aspect of this hadith project because their idea was just when they found that earlier compilations had hadiths in them which were both authentic and weak, and they had a mixture of different gradings, and that was reasonable as well because people wanted to convey everything and leave it to the scholars to sort them out. But Imam Bukhari wanted to make a collection in which it was only sahih, only the authentic grading of hadith. So that is the role that Imam Bukhari has, not to invent the writing of hadith, which is totally not true. So Bukhari and Muslim remain the master books of Sahih Hadith. Bukhari is considered to be, the Sahih of Bukhari is considered to be the more authoritative, to the extent that people say of it, that it is the most authentic book after the Quran. But the Sahih of Muslim has some advantages for us in terms of being organized in a certain way, having clearer chapters and divisions, which makes it easier to use than the Sahih of Bukhari. Then we have books which are known as the six books, and sometimes they refer to the 9 books. So after the Bukhari and Muslim, which is 2 of the 6, we have An-Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, and Ibn Majah. Again, these are names that you would hear a lot quoted after hadiths. You see the hadith in the brackets, right? Ibn Majah, for example. And there are other books which are outside of the 6. The 6 are considered among the most famous and important for the use of scholars. So in deriving fiqh and so on. But also there's the Muwatta of Imam Malik, there's the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, the Sunan al-Darimi. There are other Sahih books as well. There are other books which are focused on the Sahih, as well as Bukhari and Muslim. But we're not trying to get into all the details of this, but to give the idea. What may be more important for many of us is subject-specific collections. Okay, this is the next point here. There are books which have gathered hadiths on a certain theme. And these are very useful for us, for our personal development, for preparing classes and courses and study circles. There are hadiths which are surrounding the matter of worship. So Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, has Al-Kalim al-Tayyib, which is a book full of hadiths of dua. And that has a commentary on it by Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, which has been translated into English. And it's called The Invocation of God. And it's a very, very valuable book. Imam al-Nawawi has Al-Afkar in the same category. Collections on character. Imam Bukhari has another book as well as his Sahih, which is called Al-Adab al-Mufrad. So it's specific to the issue of character. And our friend, Shaykh Abu Isa, Ni'matullah, has a series where he's explaining Al-Adab al-Mufrad in English, or the first chapter of it. We have Shu'ab al-Iman of Al-Bayhaqi. We have Riyad al-Salihin, a very, very famous book, which is a collection of Imam al-Nawawi of hadith related to character. And again, there are translations of these hadiths. This is something which every Muslim home should have. Riyad al-Salihin, for example. There's the 40 hadith of al-Nawawi as well. Very, very valuable book. And we have even commentaries of that, which are available in English. There are other collections like collections of law. So Imam Ibn Hajar has Bulugh al-Maram. Bulugh al-Maram is a collection of hadith related to fiqh. So these are different kind of collections which exist. Now let's get into the last slide, which is about how we interact with hadith and sunnah. And this really is the crux of the matter and what we wanted to focus upon. Now, the Quran itself is a book in Arabic with the highest level of eloquence. And since the beginning, there has been a field and a genre which is called tafsir of the Quran. And there are big books which are written on tafsir of the Quran. And it's understood that to understand the Quran, you need to have a certain set of tools. To be a mufassir, to explain the Quran, you need that certain level of knowledge and understanding and penetrating insight, knowledge of all the fields that are relevant to what you are doing. And to translate the Quran, you need a certain extent of that as well. Or you need to go and refer to the commentaries and the tafasir, which help you to be able to know what the verse is saying in order to convey its meaning in English or another language. But what is commonly missed is the fact that hadith is very much in the same situation. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ also is explaining things at the highest level of eloquence. That's number one. Number two, he is speaking about different topics at different times. He is referring in one place to a ruling, and then he is talking about the ruling in another way, in another context, another time. And this is the disaster that we have, where people have become very literalist when it comes to hadith. More so than the Quran. But people, when it comes to being very literalist, it becomes about the hadith. In order to believe that we have understood a hadith, we have to read some kind of commentary. And the difficulty and the problem that we have at the moment is, these are very, very scarce to find in translation. So while we have, in fact, tafsir of the Quran is in the same situation, but we have at least a couple of things like tafsir ibn Kathir and the explanations of Mawdudi and Saeed Qutb and others we could refer to and we can benefit from. But for hadith, where do you go? There are things, but do you know them? It's very hard to find. There are some commentaries, there are some translations. The publisher Darus Salam, which is a Saudi publisher, Darus Salam, they have been publishing the hadith books with translation, and I believe that those translations would have relied upon the commentaries. But they haven't translated the commentaries as well. We have commentaries, as I said, on some of the shorter collections, like commentary on the 40 hadith, for example. But commentary on Bukhari, commentary on Muslim. The greatest commentaries that we have of these, the commentary of Bukhari is called Fath al-Bari. This is the greatest and most famous of the commentaries. But there are actually lots. And there's a commentary on Muslim by Imam An-Nawawi as well. And this is considered to be the best commentary on Imam Muslim Sahih. But these things are not available for us in English. So at the very least, what I would say at this stage is we have to be humble. We have to be humble when dealing with hadith. We have to realize the limits of our knowledge. Before saying, the Prophet ﷺ said this and he meant this, and start to extrapolate from this, we have to calm down a little bit. And I'm speaking in particular about, I'm sure you're aware, there is a tendency among some people to think that they can argue on the basis of hadiths by picking up a translation of Al-Bukhari, for example. And the issue that they have when they want to disagree with a certain practice, maybe somebody is following a particular fiqh ruling within their madhab, and then somebody says, but look, the hadith in Bukhari is different from that. Now the problem with that is there's many problems with that. But in what I'm contextualizing, I hope that you can see the problem. You see, that person, when they're reading that hadith, they don't know, first of all, are there other hadiths on the subject? Are there other hadiths that are also sahih on the subject that would apparently contradict this hadith? Is this the only hadith that's relevant, the one that you happen to have found? Are there other hadiths? Are there other reasons to consider the ruling to be other than what's apparent in that hadith? Has that hadith been abrogated by another hadith? Maybe the Prophet ﷺ said that at an earlier time, and then he said something else and changed the ruling at a later time. This happens a lot. Maybe the scholars differed on that. Some of them considered it abrogated, some of them consider it not abrogated. So there's a lot more complexity than just finding the text of the hadith and then taking the most literal approach to it. The second point that I wanted to mention is avoiding confusing texts. And here I'm actually referring to the context of giving da'wah or posting reminders on Facebook and things like that. Because people often like to post hadith. I don't know why they post hadith, they don't want to post Quran. It's okay, both of them are fine. But the problem is that when they're posting hadith, people are often not aware of how to go about posting hadith. How do you choose the hadith? How do you know if your posting is authentic or not? At least the verse of the Quran, you know, is from the Quran. And if there's any issue, we can look it up. And if we get confused, you can go and read some other translations of that verse. You go to Quran.com, you look up the verse, you can find 5 or 6 translations. And you can compare it and you can try to figure out what it was that is confusing to you. If that doesn't work, you go to the tafsir. For hadith, unfortunately, it's harder. So, people sometimes post things which end up creating controversy, argumentation, because they haven't thought about what they have selected. Related to that is the next point. Avoid the weak and the spurious. What does spurious mean? Fabricated. Baseless. Basically, in hadith there are 2 categories. There is the accepted and there is the rejected. The accepted hadith is called Sahih or Hasan. Sahih is the highest level, then Hasan. The rejected hadith is called Da'if or Mawdu', weak or fabricated. Now there is some detail in this. If there is hadith which is weak, the majority of scholars believe that there are some contexts where you could still save it from its complete rejection and make some use of it. Right? Because it's not being declared absolutely as fabricated, as a lie. It's just that it hasn't been proven to be said by the Prophet ﷺ. Now the problem is that when people hear this, that there are reasons to use weak hadith, they sometimes exaggerate in the matter or basically just imply that any weak hadith you can basically use it. In Fadail al-Amal, I'm not talking about the book, Fadail al-Amal, I'm saying in narrating good deeds. But the scholars have placed conditions, even those ones I'm saying who accept the use of weak hadith in certain contexts. They said, we don't use them for rulings in fiqh, that when it's weak, we only mean if it's slightly weak, not if it's very weak. If it's very weak, then it must be abandoned altogether. That when you quote it, you don't say, the Prophet ﷺ said, and then quote the hadith. Because that is a statement of certainty. Instead you say, it is narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said. And there's a very important difference between these 2 things. And to be honest, for myself, I'm not a specialist in hadith, I'm not a memorizer of hadith. When I want to quote a hadith, I'm more hesitant. I don't know if I have been so far in this talk. But if I don't know that the hadith is authentic, then I prefer to say, it is reported that the Prophet ﷺ said. Even if it's an authentic hadith, because I'm not sure that it's an authentic hadith. And people have a nice habit as well when they quote the hadith and say, أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, or as he said صلى الله عليه وسلم, in order to sort of give a caveat, because they're not sure that they've narrated his exact words. Compared to when the Quran, we're not allowed to quote the Quran and paraphrase it. Yeah? If you don't know the meaning, the good thing is when you're speaking a different language, you can just translate it. If you've forgotten the exact words, just translate it, or say the translation, because you don't have to be exact in that. But when you say قال Allah, yeah, there's no room for changing the words. The 4th condition, they say that if you're going to mention a weak hadith, it's because it falls under an established, proven principle in the deen. Something which is already proven. Then there's no harm in mentioning a weak hadith, just because it contains an encouragement to do that thing which is already proven. Right? So this is the idea. Finally, to choose and quote your sources. I have sometimes had, been sort of an annoying kind of party pooper on Facebook. And I'm proud of that. Because people like to post things without really thinking about it, and then I come on and say, where is your source, please? What's the reference for this? Not him again, And people do actually get genuinely annoyed, and I'm quite fine with that, because if it's a matter of trying to do my bit to preserve the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ, for me, that was the purpose of going and studying in Al-Azhar or getting whatever. The purpose of that is to do your bit, to treat the deen with the respect that it deserves. Some people appreciate that, and most people, to be fair, do appreciate that, and other people don't appreciate that. But it is not acceptable just to say, I post something, and I say, you put the quote, and then afterward you put a little squiggly line and you write, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This is not how you quote the hadith. You put a statement and then you say, said by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not like a quote. People put false quotes from Abraham Lincoln or Gandhi or Mandela all the time. And whatever. That's between you and Mandela. But with the Prophet ﷺ, you have a more important issue. You have a problem. Because he has said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawa maq'adahu min an-nar." Whoever lies about me or attributes something to me falsely on purpose, let him prepare his seat in the hellfire. And yes, I know that people are not doing it on purpose. So, inshallah, they are safe from the full punishment mentioned in the hadith. But he has also said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is enough of a lie for a person to narrate everything that he hears. And Imam Muslim mentioned this in his introduction to his Sahih. It is enough of a lie to narrate everything that you hear. So, I read on somebody else's Facebook wall this hadith, so I share, comment, like, without checking, without any reference. At least you put a reference. Sometimes I ask somebody, what's your reference? Said, I don't know, it was that person's wall. So right, I got it from that person's wall. This is a small bit of isnad, isn't it? Right? So I got it from that person's wall. Then at least if we wanted to, we can go to that person. Where did you get it? I got it from that person's wall. I got it from that website. Someone said to me, what if I just got it from a text message? I said, right, say that you got it from a text message, and then we will see how foolish you are. Don't hide as if that you've got that from a book of hadith. If you got it from a text message, then tell us it was a text message, and we will at least treat it with suspicion until we have checked it from a source. But see, this is the problem. People are not aware, they're not concerned about the etiquette of sharing the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So choose your sources carefully. This is number one. Only take hadith from a reliable book of hadith. And we've mentioned what are the reliable books of hadith. In some of those books there are hadith which are weak, hadith which are fabricated. Not in Bukhari and not in Muslim. But apart from that, the other books contain some weak and even possibly some fabrications. But at least you are attributing to a book of hadith, not a tweet. You know, you're referring to something which is at least respectable and reliable on the whole. Even other books, by the way, you have to be careful of. Other books which are written by great scholars, when it comes to hadith, they may not be strong and they may not be reliable. Even books of tafsir will contain many hadiths which are not authentic. I will give you an example of a book. This is something that I noticed when I was younger. I was using a book which is called Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. Do you know this book? Mukhtar Holland is the translator of this book, but it's actually by Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali's book is Ihya Ulumuddin, and this is an excerpt from it related to the Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. Ihya Ulumuddin is an amazing book in Islamic history, and the translation is mashallah nice as well. But the problem is, Imam Ghazali was not rigorous in his treatment of hadith in this book, or in general, because he was not a specialist in hadith. And so the scholars, like Imam al-Iraqi, went to his book and did a study of the hadiths in there, and later on made the differentiation between the authentic and the inauthentic. But the problem is, in this translation, for example, you'll be reading in the main part of the book some amazing things, you know, like the thing about fabricated hadiths are usually like they make your eyes pop. Wow, that's, you know, exciting, right? Because you never heard it before, as opposed to the authentic ones you're used to hearing. But the inauthentic ones, you're like, wow, you know, that's really, you know, really exciting. I'll click like on that if I was able to. But then when I went to the back for the references, it was saying, not found, unknown, not found, unknown. And then one of them, authentic. Most of them are not found and unknown. But if you never went to the back, you will not know that. And then you're going to quote in a study circle, the Prophet ﷺ said, and you will quote something which is completely false. Even though he is Imam Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam, and we're not taking away from his status, but the book cannot be relied on for hadith. So that's why you need to use editions which at least will be able to tell you what hadiths are authentic and which are not. So when you quote the hadith, this is what you need to do. You can quote it, and then you put the source, the book that it came from. Yes, ideally you would even quote the chapter and the page number, all of these things, but even just quote the source, Tirmidhi. Okay? You don't have to say from Abu Huraira, from Abu Saeed al-Khudri, because that is not hugely impactful on the narration of the hadith, because it could be narrated from them and then not authentic. So here are a few selected readings. Inshallah, I'm going to conclude here and take any questions and comments. There are a few books, I brought some of them with me just to show you, which are essential. I'm not going to claim this is essential yet because I haven't read it, but this is a book by an American Muslim scholar called Jonathan Brown, which is called Hadith. And this is an example of Western study of Hadith. Western, but he is also showing us about the background of Hadith and authenticity. And through this you can appreciate the Hadith project that we have spoken about. And this book, Approaching the Sunnah, by Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Approaching the Sunnah. In Arabic, كيف نتعامل مع السنة. And here there's a lot of things about how to understand hadiths and how to understand them in the context of each other and go beyond just merely the literal understanding. And جزاكم الله خيرا for your attention. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
I wonder if I've been good today. Seems to nobody. So why am I afraid to pass away? Strange thought as I lay. I have faith there is somewhere. And I love Allah. Someday a spark that fire. I'm a star.